Welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're looking at, well, energy use. In recycled paper production,
Okay.
we found this 2021 study from Sustainability Journal
Interesting.
all about, well, a paper mill in Italy that makes packaging entirely from recycled paper and cardboard.
Huh.
And what makes this mill really interesting is that they actually generate their own power
Oh,
using what's called a cogeneration system, or CHP.
okay.
But the question we want to unpack today is, well, is that actually the most environmentally friendly way to do it?
That's a good question. I mean, you might assume, right, that plugging into the grid would be the cleaner option.
Right.
But this study used something called life cycle assessment,
Oh,
or LCA,
LCA.
which is a way of measuring the total environmental impact of a product.
Oh, okay.
So from raw materials all the way to how it's made, used, and eventually disposed of.
Gotcha.
And the results, well, they might surprise you.
Okay, so walk me through this LCA. What were they actually comparing here?
Sure. So they look at two scenarios. The first was the mill's current setup. They call it Scenario 1.
Okay.
And they use this CHP system,
Right.
powered by natural gas,
Okay.
to create both electricity and heat for their processes. They even generate surplus electricity sometimes.
So they're not just making boxes, they're like a mini power plant.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
how does that compare to the second scenario then?
So in Scenario 2, they imagined the mill, well, ditching the CHP
Okay.
and using a separate natural gas boiler for heat.
Uh-huh.
But they would pull all their electricity from Italy's national grid.
Oh, interesting.
So that they're essentially looking at the trade-offs
Yeah.
between, self-sufficiency
Mm-hmm.
and relying on the grid.
Okay. So which one was better for the environment?
Well, this is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
The study actually found that the mill's current setup, Scenario 1 with the CHP, was better
Mhm.
for the environment in almost every category.
Really? Even though they're using natural gas?
Yeah.
That seems counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But Italy's grid is heavily reliant on fossil fuels,
Oh, okay.
particularly coal, which is, well, significantly dirtier than natural gas in terms of emissions.
Huh.
Plus, the CHP system is remarkably efficient.
Okay.
It captures and uses the waste heat
Mm.
that would normally be lost in traditional power generation.
Ah, I see.
So you're essentially getting, double the bang for your buck,
Yeah.
energy-wise.
So being off the grid in this case is the greener option, even if it means using natural gas.
Yeah, pretty much.
But I imagine there are still some downsides.
Quite, you're absolutely right. Even in this better scenario,
Yeah.
the study found that energy consumption was still the biggest environmental factor in the paper-making process.
Yeah.
It accounted for about 70% of the global warming impact
Wow.
in Scenario 1, and about 68% in Scenario 2.
So even though they're doing comparatively well, there's still a pretty big footprint
Yeah, for sure.
associated with powering the operation. That makes sense. It sounds like, they're doing the best they can
Yeah.
with what they've got. But there's definitely room for improvement. So it's not just about using recycled materials, it's about the whole energy picture. What were some of the other environmental hotspots that they found?
Well, one that stood out was the use of chemicals.
Yeah.
In the paper-making process. You think about all the steps involved in breaking down those recycled fibers,
Right.
removing inks,
Mm-hmm.
and then binding it all back together into those new sheets
Right.
of packaging material.
Yeah.
And each stage requires specific chemicals.
Oh, okay.
And the production and use and disposal of those chemicals, well, it all adds up in
Yeah.
terms of environmental impact.
So even if you have a clean energy source, there are these other costs
Yeah.
further down the line. Did they look at waste at all?
They did. And waste disposal was another significant factor,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the incineration and landfilling of plastic waste.
Yeah, the plastic problem.
It
It
can-
never goes away.
It's everywhere. It highlights the need for systemic change, not just individual action. But
Right.
before we get too bogged down
Yeah.
in all the, doom and gloom,
Right.
it's important to remember that awareness is the first step
Yeah,
towards finding solutions. And this study, well, raises some good points.
absolutely. Understanding these complex systems is so crucial if you want to make better decisions as consumers and advocate for change. But before we jump into solutions, I'm curious about the natural gas.
Okay.
Like where it comes from. How does that play into the environmental impact?
So that was a fascinating detail that the study highlighted. They found that the origin of the natural gas being imported into Italy
Right.
had a significant effect on the footprint of the whole process.
Oh, wow. So even if it's all natural gas, the source matters.
Exactly. Importing it from Russia had the biggest negative impact
Ah,
compared to sources like Algeria or Northern European countries.
okay. What makes the Russian gas so much worse? Is it just like the distance it has to travel?
Distance plays a role, but it's likely a combination of things,
Okay.
like the efficiency of the extraction process
Right.
in Russia
Mm,
and how strict their environmental regulations are compared to other suppliers.
I see.
Those factors all contribute to a higher footprint.
So it's not just what kind of energy, but where it's coming from and how it's made.
Right. It shows, how important transparency and accountability are
Right.
throughout the whole supply chain. If we're serious about sustainability, as consumers, we don't always see these details, but studies like this, well, they can help shed some light on things.
Transparency is key. But I'm also thinking, big picture here. Even the good scenario still relies on natural gas. What does that tell us about sustainable production? Like, are there any alternatives?
That's a good question, and one that the study touches on. They do mention some alternatives.
Yeah.
But before we get into those,
Maybe we should take a step back and look at the chemical side of things
Mhm.
in more detail. This is an area where innovation could really make a difference. Yeah. I'm curious to learn more about those chemicals, like what they are and why they're such a big deal.
Yeah. Well, to understand that, we need to delve a bit deeper into the paper-making process itself. It's not just throwing old cardboard boxes into a blender.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about all the steps, right, that go into turning recycled paper into something new. I have to admit, I never really thought about the chemicals involved.
It's one of those things we take for granted, isn't it? You just toss something in the recycling bin
Yeah.
and assume it, like, magically transforms into a new product.
Hmm.
But there's a whole world of industrial chemistry
Mm.
happening behind the scenes.
So, like, give me a glimpse into that world. What are the chemicals? What makes them so impactful, environmentally speaking?
Well, let's say you have, a pile of recycled paper and cardboard.
Right.
First step is to break down those fibers into pulp.
Right.
And that involves chemicals like sodium hydroxide and hydrogen peroxide.
Okay.
These help to separate the fibers and remove things like inks and coatings.
So it's like a chemical bath.
Yeah.
To strip everything back down to the basic building blocks of paper.
Exactly.
What happens next?
Well, once you have that clean pulp,
Yeah.
you need to treat it with, other chemicals to improve its strength and durability. Things like starch
Hmm.
and calcium carbonate
Okay.
are commonly used as fillers and binders. And of course, you'll need chemicals to control the pH and prevent foaming during the papermaking process.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It is, and that's why the production and use of these chemicals has such a big impact.
Yeah.
Not just in terms of resource consumption,
Yeah.
but also land use. A lot of these chemicals are derived from,
Right.
agricultural products
Yeah.
or require those big industrial processes,
Right.
which can have a big footprint on how we use land.
So it's not just the impact at the mill, it's also about those upstream impacts
Right.
associated with producing the chemicals in the first place.
Yeah.
It really broadens the scope, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And it shows how important it is to think about sustainability in a holistic way. You can't just focus on one piece of the puzzle. You need to consider the whole life cycle of a product. From the raw materials to the energy used in creation to the chemicals in processing, and then ultimately the waste generated at the end of its life.
That life cycle perspective is so important, and it brings us back to that waste disposal question. The study mentioned that plastic waste was a big issue here.
Right.
Even though the mill is using recycled materials, it's still generating waste with a negative impact.
Exactly. And it highlights the challenge, right, with packaging and single-use materials. We might make eco-conscious choices by buying products made from recycled paper. But if those products are, wrapped in plastic or have plastic components, we're still contributing to that larger problem.
It's like taking one step forward and two steps back. It can feel a little disheartening.
I understand that feeling. But it's important, to acknowledge those complexities and not shy away from those tough questions. Awareness and transparency are key here. The more we understand these systems, the better equipped we are to, advocate for meaningful change.
Absolutely. Speaking of change, the study mentions some alternatives to natural gas, specifically wind power and some alternative fuels for the CHP system. What do you think about those possibilities? Are those realistic options for an industry like this?
I think those are, promising avenues to explore. The paper industry has been making strides, incorporating renewable energy sources
Right.
like biomass
Yeah.
and wind power.
Yeah.
But there's still hurdles to overcome. The initial investment for
Yeah.
things like wind turbines or converting a CHP system to run on alternative fuels can be significant.
So there are economic barriers too. It's not just about the technology itself.
Right. Sustainability isn't just about environmental consideration. It's got to be economically viable, too. Transitioning to renewables requires planning and often a supportive policy environment to make those options more attractive and accessible.
It sounds like we need a multi-pronged approach to address both the technology and the economics. But it is encouraging to know that there are paths forward.
It is. It shows that, collaboration is needed between industry and policymakers
Mm.
and consumers. We all have a role to play in driving this transition to a more sustainable future.
Well said. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to go back to that core question. Even the good scenario still uses natural gas.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about the challenges of achieving truly sustainable production in the world we live in?
It's a crucial question. It really gets to the heart of the systemic challenges we face.
Rawr. I mean, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the scale of it all and feel like individual actions don't matter.
I get that. But progress doesn't always happen in these big leaps. Sometimes it's a series of smaller steps, incremental improvements that add up over time. And this study shows that, even within the existing infrastructure and economic realities, it's possible to create systems that are, well, comparatively more sustainable.
That's a good point. The CHP system,
Yeah.
while not perfect, shows that making smart choices about energy use can have a real impact.
Right. And by identifying those major hotspots, the reliance on natural gas, the chemical inputs, the waste disposal, the study gives us a roadmap for where to focus our efforts. It's about, targeting those areas where innovation and change can have the most impact.
It makes you think about all the potential solutions out there, just waiting to be discovered and implemented. What are some of the innovations that you think hold the most promise for reducing the footprint of industries like this?
One area I'm excited about is closed-loop systems. Imagine a paper mill that not only uses recycled materials, but also captures and reuses the chemicals involved in the process.
Wow. That would be a game changer. It would reduce both resource consumption and waste generation.
Exactly. And it's not just a pipe dream. There are researchers and companies working on these closed-loop technologies right now.
That's amazing. So there is real potential to close the loop on these processes
Yeah.
and minimize their impact.
There is. Another area that's promising is using artificial intelligence
Hmm.
and machine learning
Oh, interesting.
to optimize processes and reduce waste. By analyzing data and finding patterns, these technologies can help make smarter decisions about everything from energy use to chemical usage, leading to big efficiency gains.
So it's not just new technologies, it's about using existing technologies more intelligently.
Exactly. And that brings us back to transparency and collaboration. We need to share knowledge and best practices across industries
Yeah.
to accelerate the adoption of these sustainable solutions. I mean, the more we can learn from each other, the faster we can make progress.
I couldn't agree more. Collaboration is key. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've seen that even the good scenario still has environmental downsides. So knowing what we know now, what do we need to do to break free from fossil fuels and achieve truly sustainable production in industries like this?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that we all need to be thinking about. But this deep dive has given us a good framework
Yeah.
for thinking about these challenges and exploring potential solutions. It's about, understanding the complexities, embracing transparency, and working together to drive change.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this deep dive into the world of recycled paper and the energy equation.
It's been a pleasure exploring these complex issues with you, and we hope you've learned something valuable along the way.
Remember, sustainability is an ongoing conversation, so keep the discussion going. Share your thoughts, your questions, your own deep dives into this topic.
On social media, we always love to hear from you. We're all in this together. And the more we can learn and share, the closer we'll get to that, truly sustainable future we're all striving for.
Until next time, keep diving deep. It really is a fascinating challenge to, think about how we can change, like fundamentally change the way we make and use things in a way that's, less harmful to the planet.
It is. It's one of the biggest challenges we face today.
Yeah.
But I'm optimistic
Right.
that with, innovation and a real commitment to working together, we can make real progress.
I am too. And this deep dive, I think, has shown us some really promising areas for that innovation. You talked about closed loop systems
Hmm.
and using AI. What other ideas are there that could really transform these industries, like paper production?
Well, one that's getting a lot of buzz is biomimicry.
Biomimicry.
It's basically looking at nature
Right,
for
right.
inspiration and
Oh.
trying to design, processes and materials that mimic the efficiency and sustainability of natural systems.
So instead of reinventing the wheel, we can learn from nature's designs. What would that even look like for paper making?
Well, imagine a process that uses, let's say, enzymes or microorganisms
Okay.
to break down those recycled fibers instead of those harsh chemicals,
Right.
or maybe developing new types of paper that are completely biodegradable, like a leaf decomposing in the forest.
That's incredible. It's like, taking cutting edge science and combining it with nature.
Exactly. And there are researchers all over the world exploring these possibilities. It's a really exciting field with a lot of potential.
It really is. So if someone is listening to this and, feeling inspired, what can they actually do to support these more sustainable practices in their own lives?
I'd say first and foremost, stay informed, stay engaged. Keep learning about these issues, ask questions, and demand transparency from the companies you buy from.
Knowledge is power, right?
Well,
The more we understand, the better choice we can make.
right. And beyond our own choices, we can advocate for change, support policies that, promote renewable energy, encourage these new technologies, and hold industries accountable for their impact on the environment.
Those are all great points. And I think it's important to remember that sustainability is a journey, not a destination. We don't need to have all the answers now, but we can keep learning, keep experimenting, and just, keep pushing for progress.
Well said. It's about, always striving to do better,
Mm.
both as individuals and as a society.
Exactly. And on that note, we want to thank you, the listeners, for joining us for this deep dive into the world of recycled paper. It's been, eye-opening. And we hope you've come away with a better understanding of the energy side of things, the challenges, and the potential solutions.
It's been a pleasure talking about this with you. And remember, sustainability is a conversation we all need to be part of.
So keep diving deep, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation going. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic that matters. Until then,